Welcome back, everybody, to the New York Knicks, MyNBA franchise, here on NBA 2K23. In the last episode, our season came to a close as we lost Game 5 of the second round of the playoffs against the Orlando Magic. It was a very competitive game up until the end, but Orlando played better than us down the stretch. They outscored us by 9 in the fourth quarter. They had 67 points in the second half, and we just could not hold up. It's been a pretty depressing series for sure. Game 1, we blew a big lead. Game 2, we forgot how to play basketball in the second quarter. Game 3, we were up by as many as 24 in the second half and still lost. Game 4, of course, being our only win. We were the #1 seed in the Eastern Conference, and, well, there's no excuse to be losing in 5 games in the second round. This year's playoffs have been pretty wild. I thought our biggest threat in the East was Detroit, and our biggest threat in the West was Houston, and they both lost in round 1. So on one hand, there's been a lot of parity this year in the playoffs, so maybe we shouldn't feel so bad about losing in the second round. But on the other hand, this could have been our year. We don't have to worry about these super high-end teams coming after us, and it was really our championship to lose, and, well, we lost it. So normally the episode after the season ends would be the draft preview. However, today we're going to do something a little bit different. The draft preview will be in the next episode, and from there we'll regularly keep going with the offseason. However, I kind of just want to talk about this roster today because it's in kind of a weird spot. And I want to look at some potential targets who we could potentially acquire because I don't know when else I would do that in the offseason. I want to save the draft preview for just draft-related things. So I kind of just wanted to get its own separate episode of really trying to figure out what direction we take with this team in the offseason because I really feel like we can finalize our core roster this offseason, but we've got to figure out what we want to do. I think realistically, we got to go out and get a #2 star to pair up with Jason Tatum. Obviously, Tatum is a perfect #1 option. He has led a team to a championship before. He won it a couple years ago with Boston and Jaylen Brown. So we know he can be a #1. But I'm not as confident as I thought I was that we have a #2 on our roster. So we're going to try to figure out who we could look to acquire, what a potential trade package could look like, because presumably we're going to have to give up a lot. We have plenty of young players on the team. I'm really hoping that maybe one of these guys can develop into a legitimate star, but we need somebody now because our championship window is right now. We've already had Tatum here for 1 season, and I think he'll continue to play better and better as a Knick, but I don't want to waste his contract. He's got 3 more years left, and I want to maximize our opportunity with a star. So I want to hear your guys' feedback of my roster assessment down below in the comments because I know a lot of people have different opinions on what they view of the players on the team. So this is sort of where my head is at with everything, and we'll do it by position. We'll start with the guards, and we've got plenty of young guards on the roster, so presumably one of these guys would probably be the focal point of a trade. The big 3 we have is DiCarlo, Diablo, and Ramses, all of whom have been very high draft picks in this series. They're all very talented players in their own right, but we have 3 of them, and I don't think we really need 3. We have Coco coming off the bench for now, but I think all 3 of them in terms of talent are pretty equal, even though Cesar DiCarlo is higher rated than them. I actually think he might be the worst asset of the group. He's the worst shot creator. He's probably the worst defender of the 3. While he is a great playmaker, Coco, Diablo, and DJ Ramses are also great playmakers, and along with that, there's the medical question mark with Cesar DiCarlo, and plus, he has 1 less year on his contract compared to Coco and DJ. So I think that these 2 guys would be the big assets that a team would look for in a trade. Even though Cesar DiCarlo is probably the worst of the 3, I think realistically we would keep him and trade away one of these 2 guys. And I think their trade value is closer than people think. DJ Ramses is obviously really good. He was the #9 pick a few years ago, and I like his development, but he was disappointing this year in the playoffs. His scoring numbers were down. His efficiency still solid, but down. His playmaking was down from the regular season, but his development from last year to this year as a scorer, as a shooter, it was noteworthy. Even with Jason Tatum on the roster, he was better as a scorer than he was as a rookie. Then there's Coco Diablo, who has come off the bench the last couple of seasons. I think he really can anchor an offense. It's just that he's kind of been blocked out by the other guards we've had. Coco was really good in the playoffs. He averaged 14 and 6 on solid efficiency, not quite as good as he had in the regular season, and not quite as good as DJ. I honestly think Coco was our second best player. in the postseason. He was more consistent than some of the other guys we've had. He's a better defender than DJ as well. I understand that it seems like DJ is probably our best trade asset, but I don't think Coco would be that much behind him. So I think realistically, we would probably trade one of those guys. And then, of course, these draft picks would be the other big assets as well. So realistically, we'd probably trade one of either Diablo or Ramses along with some picks. And then we've got some more young guys who are lesser assets, but still solid. I think Rod Khalif Doumbou would be a nice addition for a team. Ideally, I would like to keep him, though, because I think his development has been pretty solid. He's a good microwave scorer. And if we trade Ramses or Coco, we're going to need somebody who can kind of take over that role off the bench. At the 3, we have RJ Barrett and Cam Reddish. I don't think we're going to trade Cam Reddish. He's a really good role player for us, and I think he has more value for us than other teams. So we won't last too long on him. RJ Barrett's kind of interesting, though, because I know a lot of you guys kind of want to see us trade him. I honestly think RJ Barrett is kind of underrated by all of you. I think he has value. He can space the floor. He's a good shooter, good defender, and he's really improved as a playmaker. He was fine throughout the postseason, and I'm not, like, attached to him or anything. I'm willing to trade him, but I do like his role for us. I thought he played pretty well in the playoffs. Obviously, the efficiency was quite good. If we have to trade him for a really good player, I get it. But he's only 25 years old, and I think he's really carved out a good role for us. So I'm more than fine with keeping him long term. I will say, though, I would rather play Jason Tatum at the 3 next year because he got bullied by Paolo Banchero. So I don't really know what that means for Barrett's role. Maybe we have him at the 2, or maybe even come off the bench. I don't know. At the 4, we have Patrick Feinstein and Zachariah Royster. Both of these guys could be good assets in a trade. These guys aren't premium assets, but they're both solid young players. I think Zachariah Royster's proven to be a pretty good value pick. We got him with the 25th overall pick last year, and he played well. He didn't really play in the postseason. He got injured in the first game and hasn't played since. But I do like what he can do. He's a talented big who can play the 5. He can space the floor. And then Patrick Feinstein's a tough, gritty player who also can space the floor. He's a pretty versatile defender. He can guard the wing. He can guard the paint. So I think he's got some good flexibility, but he's on the last year of his deal. I don't know if he's going to want a big extension, especially if he plays well next year. And then at the 5, Jared Allen's on the last year of his deal. He's a free agent this offseason, so we're not going to be able to trade him. The discussion with him is, do we bring him back or not? Jared Allen was inconsistent throughout the playoffs, but I will say, when he was playing well, it was a night and day difference. We were a significantly better team when Jared Allen made a big-time impact for us. If we do bring him back, then Ahmed Kabongo probably isn't a long-term piece. I think Kabongo was honestly pretty good in the playoffs. I like what I saw from him. I know the numbers don't look spectacular, but he had some good moments. He had a double-double in one of the games, I think against Orlando, in less than 20 minutes. So if Jared Allen is not back, I'm confident with Kabongo as the starting center next year. But realistically, we do have the money to bring back Allen. So Kabongo could certainly be a trade asset for us. If we were to make a trade for a really good superstar, I think the package would look like this. We would probably trade one of either DJ Ramses or Coco Diablo. There's no reason for us to trade both. I think one of them would be a good enough asset for the team who's taking them to be really excited about them. We would have to give up multiple first-round picks. We're probably not going to make a trade before the draft lottery, so we're going to hope we get lucky with those Bulls and Raptors picks. And then I think probably 2 of the young depth players out of Doumbou, Feinstein, Royster, and Kabongo. Ideally, I would like to keep Doumbou, and I would like to keep one of the guys who can play center, which would be Kabongo or Royster, but it really depends on what the team who we're trading with ultimately wants. So I think, obviously, it depends on what type of star we're getting. If we're getting someone who's not as good, we certainly wouldn't give up this much, but if we're getting a premium player, and we're going to talk about some potential premium players we could get, we would have to give up one of the really good guards, 2 more young guys, and at the bare minimum, 2 highly valued first-round picks. So now let's take a look at some players who we could go after. Let's go star hunting. And there's a lot of good options out there for us. I think the 2 most realistic and best options for us are actually playing in the same playoff series right now. As I take a look at this New Orleans and Minnesota series, I think both of these teams have players who could be available depending on how this postseason series goes. Obviously, I'm referring to Zion Williamson and Anthony Edwards. We'll start with Zion, who I think is the better of the 2. I think he'd be a better fit for us because I want to put Tatum at the 3, so sliding Zion into the power forward spot would be perfect. The Pelicans have gotten worse recently, and their roster's not going to get any better. DeAndre Ayton and Dyson Daniels are free agents. Bradley Beal is as well. He's on the player option. I assume he's going to accept it. So they're not going to have a ton of flexibility to make this roster better. And recently they've lost players like CJ McCollum, Jonas Valanciunas, and Brandon Ingram. So because of that, I think this roster is a little bit lackluster on paper. And if the Pelicans don't make the finals this year, then there's a real argument for Zion wanting out. He's had to take on a bigger load, as a playmaker this year while also producing as a scorer. He's going to have 2 more years on his deal entering this offseason, and that's sort of like the big mark of when players may consider trying to find a trade. Zion wants to test the market. He is currently satisfied, which I think makes sense. He's happy with the basketball performance from the team, but maybe he'd rather a bigger market like, say, New York. Anthony Edwards is the other option, and Minnesota's in an interesting spot because they just beat Houston in the first round, seemingly out of nowhere. But assuming they don't beat New Orleans in this playoff series, I'm not sure that Edwards is going to be content here. Karl-Anthony Towns is older. He's showing signs of age. Rudy Gobert and Anthony Simons are free agents in the offseason, and I think Alonzo Corbett and Jaden McDaniels are really the only 2 good young pieces on the roster, and both of them are free agents next offseason. So this roster is really not set up very well for the long term. So because of that, it could make sense for both parties to have an Anthony Edwards trade. I don't think Edwards is as good of a natural fit on our roster that, say, Zion Williamson is, but he's still a really good star, so beggars can't really be choosers. His contract is interesting. He's got 2 more years after this one, but he's got a player option for the second year, and I think he would say no. So realistically, he only has 1 more year on his deal after this one. So I think that certainly takes his value down a little bit. I think he would be easier to trade for than Zion Williamson. It says he wants to come back to Minnesota, but really I think that's more so because he wants to sign the Supermax. So if we were to trade for him, I think he would be just as interested in returning as long as he can sign the 5-year Supermax contract extension. So I think Zion and Edwards are the 2 most realistic options at the moment. If either of those teams go on a big playoff run, then that probably doesn't happen. Let's take a look at some lesser options now who still work, but I wouldn't be as excited about. Brandon Ingram could be interesting. I would not be willing to trade either DJ Ramses or Coco Diablo straight up for him, but maybe we could make a package with some of our younger guys who are lower in the rotation and a lesser value pick or 2. I'd be willing to do that. Jaylen Brown could be interesting. Obviously, he's paired up with Jason Tatum before, and the 2 of them have won a championship together, so it wouldn't be too much of a learning curve. The Clippers could look to trade him as their roster could kind of use a rebuild. And then going back to Minnesota, Karl-Anthony Towns could work. As I mentioned, he is showing signs with age, and if we were to trade for him, we probably wouldn't bring back Jarrett Allen, so I'm not sure that would be the best case scenario for us. I think there are also some other good options who are kind of unrealistic. I don't think these teams would necessarily look to make moves, but there are some other names I would keep an eye on, and we'll make a phone call to these teams and try to see what we can do. There's Tyrese Halliburton with the Pacers. If we trade for him, we wouldn't really need Cesar DiCarlo anymore, but I don't think Indiana would consider that. Scotty Barnes just re-upped on a new deal, so I assume Toronto probably wouldn't be interested, but maybe the Raptors want to retool their roster after a disappointing season, although I think they're excited about building around Barnes and Franz Wagner. The Pistons were the 2 seed. I think they're very happy with Cade Cunningham and Jaden Ivey in the long term. Ivey's a free agent. He's going to sign a big deal with the Pistons. Cunningham just re-upped, so I don't think that's super likely. The Cavs have been very good, but they were disappointing this year. I don't think they'd trade Garland or Mobley, but again, it is worth an idea. Trae Young with Atlanta could be ironic after, New York fans don't really like him, but he's not a good defender, and I want guys who can play defense. I do think this Phoenix situation is interesting. The Suns were pretty disappointing this year. I could see them kind of tearing down their core and maybe starting over. Kevin Durant has regressed. He is also a free agent, and I'm not so sure Phoenix is going to want to extend him. So because of that, maybe Devin Booker could be an option for a trade. He's got 1 more year on his deal. And if Phoenix does not want to bring back Kevin Durant, I think Devin Booker would become more of an available. And I think he could make a lot of sense for us as well. The problem is I want to make a trade before the draft, and Phoenix isn't going to know what they're doing with KD yet. So because of that, Devin Booker probably is not going to want out during the draft. And because of that, we would have to give up probably more for him than, say, a guy like Anthony Edwards. But, again, that could be an interesting scenario that we monitor. And then the last two are Luka Doncic and Nikola Jokic. I don't think either of these two would happen, but, again, it is worth a phone call. The Nuggets were the 7th seed. They lost in the first round in 5 games, but I just can't see them trading Jokic. As for Luka, I think he will want out of Dallas. LeBron is probably going to retire, and even if he doesn't, he's probably not going to be back. James Harden is also cooked, and Luka has 1 more year left. This team is a disaster. There's no way Luka resigns here. So the most Dallas can get for him is right now. The problem is I think Dallas is going to be too stubborn to make a move with him right away because there haven't really been any trade talks with Luka and the Mavericks yet. So because of that, I don't think they're going to rush into anything, and I want to make a move now. So I think it would be really hard to get him, but again, it would be worth a phone call. Before we wrap up the episode, I do want to get through the rest of the playoffs just so the next episode can just be focused on the draft and whatnot. So we'll simulate through these series in the West. I want to simcast this game because, again, New Orleans and Minnesota both have players who we are interested in, so I want to keep an eye on this. New Orleans currently leads the series 3-2, and they end up winning this game by 3. Anthony Simons led Minnesota with scoring, Edwards at 24. Zion balled out for the Pelicans with 32 and 9. And then the Sonics are also in the Western Conference. So we have the 2 3 seeds and the 2 5 seeds in the conference finals. Minnesota's season is over, as we expected. Gobert and Simons are probably out the door. So I think Anthony Edwards very well could be on the move this offseason. As for New Orleans, if they make the finals with Zion, I don't think he's going to want out. So we should probably root for the Sonics. They've obviously got a great young squad with Josh Giddey, John Collins, Jimmy Butler, and some of their recent draft picks. The Pelicans are just Zion, but Zion's better than anybody who Seattle has. And then we have the Celtics, who obviously lost Jason Tatum last year, and they still finished better than us, I guess. They're going up against the Orlando Magic, who just beat us in 5 games. I feel like it'd be kind of embarrassing if Boston made the finals after we stole Jason Tatum from them, but I also don't really want the Magic to win. So we'll simulate the first 4 games, and there you go. Boston leads 3-1 on Orlando, and New Orleans leads 3-1 on Seattle. So we could get an NBA Finals rematch from 2 years ago, but obviously there's no more Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown. So Boston wins in 5 against Orlando. Seattle takes Game 5 against the Pelicans, but New Orleans wins Game 6 with Zion Williamson and, of all people, Tyler Hero winning the Conference Finals MVP. So we are now in the finals, the Celtics and Pelicans rematching. Who would have guessed this Boston team, after losing Jason Tatum and trading DeJounte Murray this offseason, are in the finals? They're going up against New Orleans. I think with the Pelicans making the finals again, it'd be hard-pressed to see Zion want out. The Pelicans win the first game. It ended up being a very close one. They win the second game. Again, super close. So they take 2 close ones on the road, and then they take a close one at home. So the Pelicans are now up 3-0. They can sweep the Boston Celtics and win the finals, and they are dominating here in Game 4. Boston's making it competitive, but New Orleans seems to be in control the entire way, and I don't think Boston can come back. It looks like New Orleans is going to win this thing, so we'll hop in here for the final seconds as the New Orleans Pelicans, for the first time in franchise history, have won the NBA Finals here in the year of 2026. Zion Williamson puts this team on his back. The Pelicans have lost notable contributors over the last few years, and I think this roster is quite a bit worse than it was when they made the finals 2 years ago and lost to Boston. But they were able to get the job done here. They took advantage of an easier playoff route, mainly by Houston losing in the first round, playing against a young Seattle team and a young Boston team. But I don't want to discredit the Pelicans. They did win the finals, and they swept the Celtics. Zion Williamson feels like the king of the world. He wins for Finals MVP. What does this mean for the Knicks' chances of Zion Williamson? Simply put, it ain't happening. With Zion Williamson winning the finals here at the Pelicans, there is no reason for him to want out, and there's even less of a reason for the Pelicans to want to trade him. So it's not happening. We can cross it off the list. Zion wins the Finals MVP. He's an NBA champion with New Orleans, and I think this kind of cements that he's probably going to stick around in New Orleans, not just for the remainder of his contract, but maybe even longer. He probably signs a Supermax extension once that's over, barring some crazy fallout between him and the Pelicans. So there you go. That's today's episode. I know it was a little bit different, but it's a super pivotal offseason here for our New York Knicks, and I want to get this decision right because this is a big trade. We want to get a big-time star player, and we have to really get ourselves a good deal. I've got some fun changes for the series that I'm pretty excited to announce into the offseason. Next episode will be the regularly scheduled draft preview, so you guys will be able to get a look at all of your prospects and whatnot. We're going to have the draft lottery as well, which is very important for us because we have 2 lottery picks, including the number 2 overall projected pick from Chicago. That'll wrap up today's episode. Again, I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.